This all happened when I was 19. I'm not the best looking dude, so I've never had much luck with women, and I ended up on Tinder. I wasn't having much luck there either, until like the 3rd month of using it, when a blonde woman named Katie messaged me. She was pretty enough that I dismissed her as a bot. It wasn't until 3 days later that she messaged me again, which was odd because bots almost never message more than once. I clicked on her chat and replied, then looked at her profile. What I saw was pretty generic, but definitely wasn't a bot's profile. We had been talking for like a month when she proposed the idea that I come see her. I was pretty reluctant as she lived nearly 8 hours from me by car, but I had to admit, I really did like her quite a lot, and I'd been thinking about asking her if I could come to see her for a while now. After a bit more badgering from her, I finally said that I would take the drive to go see her. At this point, I had no reason to doubt. She was who she said she was. We had video chatted every other week, and called most days. I just assumed I got really lucky. Things did get a little weird on the way there though. She kept messaging me, asking me where I was and making sure I was still coming. At some points, when I took more than 30 minutes to respond, she would send me a slew of annoying texts. Admittedly, I had chalked this up to her being nervous about me coming to see her. I was pretty nervous too, so I couldn't blame her. I had a hard time finding the house at first. The directions she gave me were pretty confusing, and it was back through a series of gravel and dirt roads and a large thicket of trees. It was still about midday when I came to an old-looking house. A window on the 2nd floor was boarded up, but it didn't look abandoned, just worse for wear. Katie's red buggy that she liked to talk about was parked in front of the garage. I looked at my phone and texted her that I was here. She only sent a smiley face in return. When I got out of my car to knock on the door, I noticed someone was looking at me from one of the 2nd window floors. I found it a little creepy, but figured it was just her father or something. She had told me that he comes to stay with her every now and again, so I ignored it and knocked on her door. She answered with a smile and even gave me a kiss, which surprised me, and I followed her inside. We sat on a couch and started talking about our plans when I asked about her dad. "You didn't tell me your dad was here," I said. "Was that going to be a surprise or—" Katie looked confused and told me that her dad wasn't here. I still thought she was trying to keep up the act, and I told her that she didn't have to keep pretending, and that I had seen him looking at me through the upstairs window. Katie went pale and said that we had to get out of here. Now. We both ran for our cars, and when I questioned Katie, she informed me that her dad wasn't there, and that she'd been home alone until I showed up. I called the police, and while on the phone, giving the address, Katie gasped and pointed to the window where I'd last seen the guy. He was looking at us from the window again. I got a better look at him this time. He seemed older and frail, almost like he hadn't eaten in a while. He left the window after he saw that we saw him. The police took half an hour to show up, and the whole time Katie was crying and mumbling about how she was an idiot for not keeping her doors locked. When the police finally did show up, one started asking me and Katie questions, and the other two searched the house. They came back out a little later and told me and Katie that, while they didn't find anyone, they did find that the back door was hanging open. Whoever it was had ran out into the woods, but the cops were sure the house was empty. After the cops left, Katie asked me to stay the night because she was too scared to be in the house alone. I gladly did, and we slept downstairs on the couch, as Katie's bed was the room next to the one the man had been in. Katie had also brought out her shotgun that her father had given her, but she never used. I told her it was fine, the man's gone, but she insisted, saying she'd feel safer if she had it out. I'm glad she did. Later that night, I was still wide awake watching TV. Katie had somehow managed to fall asleep. From the kitchen, I heard a sound of a doorknob being turned. At this point, I wasn't even scared. I was just pissed. I flipped on the light in the kitchen and pointed the gun at the kitchen door. And there he was. The guy that had been in the house before was standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked, and I'm glad we had locked that door. The man unfroze and yet again ran into the woods. I woke up Katie and told her what happened, and called the police yet again. When they arrived, they did a sweep of the woods and found no one. They told Katie and me that it'd probably be a good idea to stay somewhere else for the night. Katie and I said our goodbyes. She was going to stay at her friend's house, and I was going home. I left a little after Katie did. I was on the phone with my brother, telling him about what happened. My headlights were on. As I was talking, something caught my eye. That man was standing at the corner of the house, just watching me. I gunned it out of there and didn't even bother calling the police again. But I did text Katie, and she said she was going to call them. I don't think Katie ever went back into that house alone. I've posted this in a few of our threads. Just curious as to everyone's take on it. This is going to be pretty lengthy, so I apologize in advance. I'll preface this by saying that I live in a small town in the Midwest of about 300 people, basically the middle of nowhere. I can remember my mother telling a story when I was younger that has stuck with me ever since. My father was an over-the-road truck driver, so he wasn't around much. That left my mother to pretty much raise my little brother, little sister, and me on her own. One night she was awoken by a bright light shining through her bedroom window. She said it was as if someone had parked their car and directly turned their bright headlights on, pointing towards her bedroom window. Her first instinct was to get up and check on us kids. She had noticed that the bright light wasn't confined to her bedroom. It was shining through every window in our house. She saw that I was accounted for, as was my little sister, but she couldn't find my little brother, who was about 3 at the time. She's scouring the house and finally sees him in our laundry room, opening the back door that leads to our backyard. And as soon as he opens the door, the brilliant light shines in, and she wakes up. She's accepting that this was all a dream, when her eyes begin to focus on the dark of her bedroom. She sees a small figure on the foot of her bed. As she sits up to see what exactly it is, it scampers off into the darkness of our house. Then she wakes up again. A dream in a dream, she's telling herself. Later that day, she's hanging up laundry and conversing with our neighbor woman, who asks her a question. "Did you guys have a party late last night?" "No," my mother replies. "Why?" Our neighbor goes on to tell her that she and her husband had a disagreement the day before, and she decided to sleep in her son's room. At about 3 a.m., she was awoken by a bright light emanating from our house. Fast forward to a few years ago. I own our old house and have children of my own. Now, to preface this story, I should mention that our house is set overlooking the town's cemetery. One evening after returning home, I'm carrying my youngest son into the house. I thought he was asleep, when all of a sudden he starts wailing and screaming while pointing across the graveyard. "Daddy, get inside. They're coming after us. They're going to take us. The green skeleton men are going to take us." So this freaks me out a bit, and I turn to try and see if there's anything he's actually seeing. I don't see anything, but he continues losing it. Once inside, he's still hysterical, wants me to lock the door and shut the shades. He absolutely refused to let me go out and get the groceries. It was bizarre, to say the least. Later that week, he has another spell. It's about 2 in the morning when I hear him crying and yelling for me. I rush into his room and he's crying, begging me not to let them take me again. I kind of write this off as a nightmare, but I ask him where they are trying to take him, and he replies, "Where the bad Power Rangers are." I proceed to ask him where the bad Power Rangers are, and he replies, "A spaceship." Now, I don't know if it was just the imagination of a 4-year-old, or if it was his mind trying to rationalize an actual traumatizing event, but I can't help but assume the two are connected. But it's the worst feeling in the world, trying to protect your child from a monster that you don't even know may exist. Fast forward again to this week. I started a paranormal and conspiracy podcast earlier this year, where we talk about creepy stuff and have listener call-ins and experiences and such. Well, I got this email this week from the son of our neighbor that saw the light over our house that night. This is what the email said. The incident involving AJ and I went like this. I know it was the early 90s because I was in my 70 Chevelle, somewhere between St. Mary's Church and where our shop is now. I was driving us home around 9 at night. No other traffic anywhere. Shortly before the highway curves left, the most intense bright white light appeared out of nowhere. It was like a flashlight being held against my eyes. Oddly enough, as blinding as it was, I could make out the outline of what I assumed was a man about my height. First instinct was to jam the brakes. As soon as I did, the light was gone. The car had died, and all lights inside and outside were not functioning. After a few seconds, the lights came on, and the car started again. AJ wouldn't even answer me when I asked him what we hit. No damage, and I couldn't find anything anywhere. I drove to Mum and Dad's and AJ begged me not to get out of the car. He never mentioned it on the highway, but now insisted I stay in the car. I went in and got Mum and told her everything. She went to talk to AJ, and he told the same story, but refused to exit the car. He told her whatever we have seen was still hiding under the car somewhere. My wife's question was, did this happen around the same time as the lights at your mum's house? His incident took place no more than a mile or so from our house, possibly the same or similar time as to the lights over the house incident. So I can't help but think they're all related, and wonder what about our small town has piqued something's interest so much. This story happened back in November 2019. For background, I'm a 20-year-old female and I live with my family. I go to a community centre twice a week with my family, and we've been going since forever, and I haven't had any problems before. This new man began attending, and of course he was welcomed. He was in his 40s or 50s, and was relatively neatly kept. He would stand near the lobby doors and just stare around at people. Quite quickly I noticed that he didn't really talk to anyone, and any conversations he had ended rather fast. As an antisocial person, I never paid too much attention, nor did I really attempt conversation. I just let him be. 2 weeks into him attending, he came up and began talking to me and my sister. We were in the front, in the opposite corner, and he made a bit of a beeline from where he was standing at the back to us. I had no idea who he was, and of all the days I decided to be conversational. So I had a normal enough conversation with him, and my sister barely said a word. He looked over at her and asked me who was the tallest. I'm the second of 4 children, and with all my pride I said I was the tallest. He kept quiet and asked me, what did I do to my sister when she was too shy? We both were kind of confused, and I was like, what? He said, yeah, when she's too shy, do you just shake her? I kind of laughed it off awkwardly and was like, no. I don't remember the rest of the conversation, but it ended pretty soon after that. Me and my sister were kind of weirded out, and I was mostly confused, as that was one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. I would have brushed it off when a friend of ours who saw him talking to us came over and basically was like, I don't know all the details, and I don't want to make a big deal out of it, but just try not to engage with him and keep your younger brother away from him. She knew him before we did, so we took her advice. There was nothing to be dramatic about. Just don't talk to him. Fine by me. But for the sake of my baby bro, who's 5, I mostly wanted to protect him. Later on, my brother was going to the coat room, and the same guy stopped him and tried talking to him. He kept trying to give my brother a high five and was leaning rather close. My brother is super shy, so he was trying to get away. I don't know what came over me, but within 0.2 seconds, I was by my brother's side. I was like, oh, I'd better go put his coat on. And he glared at me and was like, what are you going to do with my little friend? I repeated that I was going to put his coat on. He looked at me head on, well, chest, and said, take care. To me, I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, and so I didn't consider it for too long. It was kind of creepy though. Over the next few times, he made little attempts to interact with me, so that was that, I figured. However, he would stand at the lobby doors, now equipped with what looked like a giant Bluetooth device with a green beeping light, but it was strapped around his head. I figured it was an old-style Bluetooth phone, but I found that less and less people would try and interact with him. I thought what was on his head was funny, but what made me uneasy was that he would stare at me almost the entire time. I mean, like, stare. Like into my very being. He would have this creepy smile and follow me around at a safe distance. I was freaked out, and my friends made a bigger deal of it, though I didn't get why. One night, I had a few of those friends over, and they revealed to me that the device on his head was actually a camera. I was horrified. He was videotaping people in a public place without their consent. Now, many of you might say what we did next was idiotic, but we were just a bunch of silly girls, and all we wanted to do was see his Instagram profile, and then unfollow him. That's it. He has like 3 profiles, so we were all laughing and wondering what he posts. So my friend made another profile, and he accepted. We scrolled through his profile, and his captions were so odd. We were having our fun, but pretty soon, he messaged. The fake profile we had a normal selfie of a pretty girl. We all flipped and decided to see what will happen. Remember, we weren't going to lead him on or anything. He asked questions such as, what is your exact location? How old are you? He didn't reveal his age, and didn't care when she replied, saying she was like 30 years younger. either we said between 19 or 21. He kept trying to video call on Instagram, but there was no way in heck we were going to pick it up. It was the last straw when he was like, "If you were really a good person, you would show yourself. It's not like I'm touching you, yet. It's only a video call." He did not get the concept of trust and consent, despite us explaining it to him. It simply didn't make a difference to him. That was it for me. Full-fledged proof he was a creep. We deleted the account. My friend, Edna, said that he has a thing for younger girls and children and has been looking for a wife, which made me shiver. So I made sure I, my sister, or my brother was never in a place where they could be alone with him. The creepiness continued. He would be videotaping me while staring at me intensely, trying to interact. It became pretty clear that I was his next target. Edna's family is pretty familiar with him, and what he does is he'll essentially creep women to death, ask them out, and he has followed them home before. Basically the works. Apparently he was pretty notorious for it. I was getting more scared by the day, and I would dread going. He would follow me, and my heart seized when I saw his eyes. My friends made a joke of it, and said it was only a matter of time. I don't blame them for cracking jokes. They didn't know about all the things he was doing. And they did block me when they caught him staring. Dads would try to distract him, blocking his view of us, but he would ignore them and keep staring into me. It all reached a boiling point when one day he got close to me before we went. I was so scared to see him. I was remembering a while ago I told someone about the camera and to tell him to take it off. I pointed to where he usually was, and he was not there. I slyly walked about to see if I could spot him, and he was among a bunch of people staring directly at me. I was so far away from him, and he smiled in a way that he was happy I found him and waved, and I ran back before he could get more of me on tape. So yeah, I didn't want to go. That day, he was actually in closer proximity to me than usual, and I was getting a workout constantly moving about to avoid him. Eventually, me, my mum, Edna and her mum were in the coat room, which is a pretty open space. He came in and I was shoving my mum out of the coat room so we can leave, and from the corner of my eye, he was rushing. I gave my mum one more little push, and she was out of the coat room. Then he grabbed my arm and yanked me 6 or 7 feet backwards until we were in the middle of the coat room. I turned to look at him, and his eyes were something I wouldn't mind gouging out. I hated the way he made me feel when he looked at me. I can't even remember what he asked me, but I responded quickly and freed myself, realizing that he was still holding on. I proceeded to take my mum outside, because my mum was ready to draw blood. Edna's mum was asking me if I was okay, but I had too much on my mind. My dad was in the car with the rest of my siblings, unaware of what happened. I begged my mum to get into our car before he came, and I suddenly became scared that he might follow us home. So we left. We almost never get fast food, but I'm so glad my dad took us to McDonald's, and not just for the food. The rest of my family stayed in the car to hear what happened, while I went into McDonald's with my brother. 10 minutes later, my mum barged in the store and told me to get out while she gets the food. I was confused and thought she was mad at me because I was taking too much time. And I was like, fine, because apparently I can't carry a Happy Meal and fries by myself. I turned, and there he was, with his portable camera. He was waving at me, while pointing his camera to me. It was mounted on his head, so wherever his head was turned was where the camera was facing. I looked over at my mum and realized why she came in so fast. He followed us to the McDonald's, parked next to our car, which is where my mum saw him and hurried in. We left as quickly as we could, giving him no time to leave the line and come follow us. I was very shaken. I've had my fair share of heart-dropping, creepy moments, and I always thought that I would know what to do next time it happened. Those thoughts were for like spontaneous attacks. When it came to public interactions, trying to keep my brother away, I could do nothing, and I felt so stupid. I was terrified that he would follow us home. We skipped going next time. One day, we were later than usual going to the community center, and I saw his car and was like, great, now what am I going to do? But no him. It took a few days, but it was eventually revealed that the time we were not there, he was interacting with kids under 10 in an inappropriate way, looking for excuses to touch them and hugging them for too long. They were being videotaped, and honestly, goodness knows what he needed hours of mundane footage of young girls and underage boys and girls for. It was the last straw for my parents there, and the day we came late, the dad army barred him from coming in, saying that he is perfectly welcome to come in, only if he takes the camera off. He got agitated, saying it was not a camera. I had proof from this Instagram that the gadget was a camera, and he took a mirror photo with it, and had no phone or other camera. He threatened violence, and the police was called. I've heard he's out and about, but let's just say he's not coming back anytime soon. Over the next few weeks, I heard from people who were more familiar with him that he definitely had a thing for me, and that his behavior is not unusual, and it was just a matter of time. I'm so glad it's done. I still get thoughts sometimes that he's watching me, but for the most part, I can go back to normal. Hey guys, I'm typing from Trenton, Ontario, and I'm currently terrified. There has been many occurrences of things like this happening, but today is just not it. I decided I wasn't going to sleep for school the following morning, as I do sometimes. But tonight, I had a very odd vibe coming from my room window. I'm usually not the type to be frightened by my window, but today I just couldn't look at it, and there was a haunting feeling coming from it. I kind of brushed it off today. So I called a friend on Discord and we played some video games. Where I play video games, the window is directly behind me, and I can generally hear what's going on. About every 10 minutes I would hear a clicking noise. 2 clicks to be precise. My room is on the 2nd story, and there's not trees relatively close enough to create the noise, so each time I heard it, I would sort of try and make an excuse for it. Oh, it's a squirrel or something. Or maybe it's water. But after listening carefully each time, I came to notice that it was most definitely not that. Later on, around 3:45 a.m., my friend left the call to sleep, and I was sort of just chilling watching TikToks, and then I started hearing a rapid tapping. The tapping was so mortifyingly human that I froze and continued to listen to the tapping. I then recognized a 5-finger tapping pattern. I was so horrified. I sat for maybe 15 minutes straight, not looking anywhere but exactly where I froze. After calming myself down and finally letting myself breathe, I got up, not making eye contact with any wall or window, and I went to the room with no windows and chilled out for a bit. I finally went back to my room at around 4:50 a.m. I went and laid in bed, and as soon as my head hit the pillow, I heard muffled howling and barking coming from my forest. Usually I would just brush it off as my neighbor's dog, Layla. But it didn't sound like a dog. It didn't sound like Layla. It couldn't be wolves or coyotes, because they never cross a certain part of the forest, which is surprisingly closer to the 401 highway. At this point, I was really freaked out, and I just tried to continue my morning. That's really where the odd stuff ends for that night. But that's definitely not the first time this stuff has happened. We have a really old house. My parents think it's ghosts, as they've heard things mock them, weird laser lights being pointed around our house, whispering, black shadows hovering over my crib, and an old British lady calling out names. See, I agree with all that, but I think that this thing lurking in the forest by my window is different. Another weird thing that I've found is when we redid the insulation for my room and drywall, underneath the insulation was clothes from the 50s, old newspapers, and weird pagan signs spray painted in black, and a goat's head, and a bunch of gibberish words. We covered it up, but it sort of haunts me, you know, what lies beneath the wallpaper. I've done a little bit of research, and it seems we might have a dogman case on our hands. The evidence ranges from when I was little, age 10, and friends and I went into the forest alone at approximately 4 p.m. We saw an extremely large figure in the trees. It jumped down and we ran. But before we could really get a good look, we were already out of there. We assumed it was a bear, but I swear that was no bear. There was also a sighting in Brighton, Ontario, 10 minutes away from my current location. Though the sighting was in early 2017, it would make sense because my forest is attached to the highways, and the highway's forest, which goes to Brighton. Supposedly, the dogman taps on windows, howls and makes a ruckus in the forest, which all relates to me. And this part may sound crazy, but bear with me. These strange occurrences happened on a full moon, and haven't happened as badly since. At this point, I'm a little terrified, but at the same time, I'm extremely intrigued. This weekend, a friend and I are going up in this little tree hut we have deep in our forest. We're going to set up a camera for the night and come back in the morning. We also plan to do this from my window at night. I'm very excited to try and catch some of the strange behavior, even if I can't catch anything this time. I'll take some photos of the forest to show you how eerie it feels in there. If anyone has any protective methods we should use when we go, please let me know. I'll keep you updated.